Grind while they rest, study when they party, and you will live like they dream. If I could summarize hustle culture at its height into a quote, it would be this: productivity max where there is no room for rest. None at all. All of us have heard some variation of this quote. The intended meaning and the essence remains the same though. Work hard all the time, 24/7, even in your sleep. In fact, hustle culture started to portray even sleep as something only lazy and unmotivated people do. Imagine shaming sleep. It's said that millennials, people born between 1981 and 1996, are the most affected by the hustle line of thinking. And thanks to this mindset, millennials are branded as the burnout generation. But why are millennials the way they are? Well, most of them entered the workforce during the worst downturn since the Great Depression. With debt, an inability to gather wealth, poor social safety nets, they never had the financial security that was enjoyed by their parents or grandparents. To quote Anne Helen Peterson, this is a generation shaped by precarity. Hence, they were driven by the idea that you have to constantly work or else you're headed to a bottomless pit of despair. While this gets us closer to understanding the reason for the rise of hustle culture definitely has been taken to the extreme. While social media amplified the voices of the grind now shine later teen, on social media, the mental health revolution too was on a slow, gradual rise. And what we have is a clash of ideas, with one side preaching that working was the solution, and the other saying that rest and relaxation are equally important. Stuck in the middle is Generation Z. And it looks like Gen Z has embraced a philosophy that is polar opposite to the philosophy of hustle culture: slow living. Namaste, namaskaram, wherever you are. This is your host Pavana, and you are listening to Culture Speak. In the course of my time learning literature, something I've come to understand is that every new era tends to be a reaction to what came before. For instance, if the previous age was strict and traditional, the next era will rebel by embracing freedom and individuality. So it's not at all surprising that hustle culture is taking a backseat and the philosophy of slow living is making a comeback. What is slow living? It's a life that's more in alignment with your values, one that is appreciative of the world around you and the life you have. Slow living asks you to spend time with nature. It encourages time with your loved ones instead of encouraging you to be tied to your line of career relentlessly working. Of course, mindfulness is the foundation of slow living, and there's a lot of emphasis on living almost screen free, by yourself in the woods, taking in the world around you. We'll get to that in a minute. On platforms like Instagram and YouTube, the imagery associated with slow living often revolves around idyllic scenes of the English countryside. These visuals feature quaint cottages, vibrant flower bouquets, freshly harvested food, pastoral animals, radiant sunshine, and expansive green fields. Aesthetics play a pivotal role in the presentation of slow living content, with videos often looking like visual poetry. Even ordinary objects like cooking knives appear remarkably beautiful, and sunlight looks like liquid gold, and the wind a gentle whisper. Really, the creators who produce content around slow living, they're amazing at it. This lifestyle of mindful living, of not being too bogged down by the pressure to live and work at a breakneck speed, is something that the world at large can benefit from. The reason why many from Gen Z find slow living appealing is because it's a reaction to the hustle culture, the culture of overwhelm and overstimulation. Slow living helps you bring back value to your life. This philosophy isn't something new either. Tagore, Henry David Thoreau, Mary Oliver, rest of the nature writers have all championed slow living, even at a time when life was far slower. Thoreau took to the woods, opting for a conscious lifestyle. The book that he wrote during the time here, Walden, reminds us about the importance of simplicity and authenticity. Thoreau also viewed technology as an unnecessary distraction. He said, our inventions are wont to be pretty toys which distract our attention from serious things. He saw the conveniences technology afforded, but he always reminded that they wouldn't address the challenges of personal happiness. This philosophy of living, which was enthusiastically adopted by Thoreau, was because of his senior, Emerson, who was a great influence on him. This philosophy was called Transcendentalism at the time. Transcendentalism, in turn, was influenced by several branches of Indian philosophy. So, yes, slow living is a rehashing of these old philosophies, but it more or less captures the essence of what the earlier philosophies used to champion. We'll always keep coming back to lifestyles that make us slow down and return to nature, because life on the other end of the spectrum is a life of neglect. And this tendency to return to slower lifestyle, that's deeply human. Have you heard of the biophilia hypothesis? It's the idea that humans are innately attracted to nature. Edward O. Wilson, in his work Biophilia, proposed that the tendency of humans to focus on and to affiliate with nature and other life forms has in part a genetic basis. I've always found that every human being in my life only needs a gentle push towards nature. It feels as though there's something inside all of us that makes us crave nature when we don't get much of it. Slow living was a long time coming. Given our natural attraction towards nature and the fact that high tech at some point started to eat at our minds, it's all too natural for us to want to slow down and find our pace. I read a story yesterday about a new Gen Z hire who got fired from his firm because he refused to come in at 8 a.m. for a meeting because his work timing was 9 to 5 as per the job listing. The employer found it difficult to wrap their head around the fact that their employee refused to do unpaid overtime. The new hire explained that he was at the gym, that he made other commitments outside of work after knowing the job timings, and that being asked to come in for work on such a short notice is difficult, especially when he won't be paid for it. But alas, he got fired for this. There are many more stories like this that show that people are demanding better work life balances. Think about the backlash to Infosys co founder Narayana Murthy's statement that youngsters should work 70 hours a week. The backlashes such statements receive show that our priorities are changing. We want to save our life, we want to slow down and enjoy all of this. People are starting to set their priorities straight. That being said, we should be wary of slow living being limited to just an aesthetic. Remember the motifs I mentioned at the start of the episode, the English countryside, cottages, and whatnot. They certainly look delightful, but be aware of cultural conditioning. When a few elements are repeatedly used, it becomes the standard for something. This standardization, a process through which we are influenced by the environment around us, and we rely on the cues from this environment to tell us what is good and what is bad. In our case, when the countryside, white clothing, and other vintage elements and particular ways of living out your daily lives are repeatedly used to show you what slow living is, you start to believe that slow living is merely all of this and that it cannot be anything else. You get too focused on the aesthetic and you forget the essence of slow living. Think about this. This is what happened to the fitness industry too. Lots of cultural conditioning where a particular type of body is repeatedly used to show you what health looks like. And eventually, we forget the essence of the fitness movement and we get too focused on the aesthetic, on looking a particular way, all the while forgetting that health comes in different shapes and forms. Motifs such as these serve as visual cues, reinforcing the belief that adopting slow living requires incorporating all of these elements into our lives. But to live slowly, you don't need these elements. And it's impossible for all of us to move to the countryside too. You don't have to suddenly start growing your own food and abandon the modern ways of living either. Well, if that's what you want to do, certainly do it. But it's not possible to live a fully retro life in a modern world. And it's not possible for a lot of us to abandon work and pursue our passions only. Also, slow living does not mean not working or not being productive at all. Just that you live a life where you have unique personal definitions of success and happiness, and you decide where you spend your attention and energy. If you want to live slowly for the rest of your life, find your own version. What makes you feel fulfilled? What does contentment look like to you? These are difficult questions to answer, questions that will set you on a self discovery path. But hey, this is how you know if something is worth it, isn't it? It makes you think, it makes you come out of that autopilot mode you've been on. Thoreau said, man has no time to be anything but a machine. So, anything that stops the lifeless, matter of factly style of our lives these days is worth a try, isn't it? At the end of the day, slow living is about being more present, cutting out things that distract you, like social media scrolling, instead, focusing on building strong relationships, on a sense of community, prioritizing your health and well being, and thus finding fulfillment. Slow living is the antidote to burnout. And instead of collective burnout, I hope we all get collectively healthier and happier. In line with the theme of this week's episode, our recommendation is Mary Oliver's poem Wild Geese. A few lines from the poem. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. That wraps up this episode of Culture Speak. I hope you're finding value in this podcast series. See you next time. Goodbye. A rich man's world. I have turned the soul of this beautiful land, but the